When I turned 65, I threw myself a birthday party. I rented a space at a small restaurant downtown, the one with the long glass windows and linen napkins folded like tiny cathedrals. I paid extra for the candles and the soft jazz pianist in the corner. I had the tables arranged into a horseshoe, 15 seats each, with a handwritten place card and a tiny vial of lavender tied with ribbon. I ordered salmon for the entree and tiramisu for dessert. I wore a green dress that hugged me in all the ways age had made me soft. I curled my hair for the first time in a decade. And I waited. The pianist played his set twice. The candles burned lower, flickering down like hourglasses. The tiramisu sat untouched behind the bar, its delicate top sinking. And my phone, a silent slab of glass and expectation, rested next to my untouched wine glass. At first, I told myself traffic a late sitter, something came up. But the hours passed, and not one of them walked through the door. Not my son James, not my daughter Rachel, not my sister, not my niece who lives just 10 minutes away. Not one. I refreshed my phone, expecting maybe a flurry of apologies, a mix-up. But there was nothing. One text from Rachel hours before. Running behind. We'll try to make it. She didn't try. No one did. At 8:42 p.m., after 3 hours alone with the jazzman, the server, and the heavy weight of my own foolish hope, I stood to blow out the candles myself. 15 flames for 15 ghosts. I held my breath, counted slowly. Before I could exhale, the door opened. Emily, my daughter-in-law. She wore jeans and a long brown coat, no makeup hair pulled back. She looked at me, stopped just inside the entrance, then walked straight over and wrapped me in a hug that said nothing and everything. I didn't realize how rigid I'd become until I felt her body against mine. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know they all didn't come." I pulled away. "You didn't have to come either." She shook her head. "Yes, I did. We sat at the table meant for 15 and ate salmon gone cold." She poured me wine with hands that didn't shake, and for the first time that evening, I breathed. I don't remember much of the conversation, only that her eyes never left mine, that she asked me questions, real ones, that she made a joke about the candles dripping wax on the tablecloth, that I laughed, really laughed in a way I hadn't since before I knew what my children thought of me. When she left, it was past midnight. I stood at the window and watched her walk to her car. She turned once, gave a small wave, then disappeared into the night. And there I was, 65, alone again, but not broken. Not yet. I used to believe that love, if given enough, would anchor people to you. I spent most of my adult life pouring myself into the cracks of others, thinking, if I gave enough of my time, my patience, my body, my dreams, they'd stay. That's the lie they don't tell you about motherhood, about marriage. That devotion becomes expected. That sacrifice, once routine, becomes invisible. I was 23 when I married Daniel. He was quiet, steady. He never made me laugh until I couldn't breathe, but he made promises with a calm kind of certainty. I thought that was enough. I left my last semester of art school to work full-time when we found out I was pregnant with Rachel. He said we'd go back to my dreams later, Later became never. Then came James, and then Olivia. She only lived for 6 days, but those 6 days taught me how to hold something you love, even as it leaves. Daniel worked long hours. He came home with the weight of the world in his shoulders and expected me to be his silence. I was, for years. I gave him hot meals, washed his shirts, wrote checks for bills he never saw. When he died 5 years ago, suddenly, heart attack. I grieved the routine more than the man. That was the first secret I ever admitted to myself. I missed his presence, but not his person. The children were my world. I made every costume by hand, never missed a piano recital, baked cakes shaped like dragons and castles. I stayed up through fevers, drove them across state lines for tournaments, sat in school meetings where teachers looked at me with admiration. I swallowed like warm tea. I never expected gratitude, but I thought love had memory. Rachel moved away first. After college, she took a job in Seattle and called less and less. I understood she was building her life, but when I flew out for her engagement party, she asked if I could stay at a hotel because the apartment's too full already. I smiled and booked one. I told myself it wasn't personal. James stayed closer. Married Emily at 26. I loved her from the start. She had a quiet intelligence, the kind of empathy that doesn't draw attention to itself. But James, he began changing after their second child. He was always tired, always on edge. Our conversations shortened to logistics. If I asked how he was, he'd say, "Busy, Mom. Always busy." I'd bring over soup or send notes in the mail. I never got one back. When Daniel died, they all came for the funeral. I remember standing in the kitchen afterward, still in my black dress, cutting lemon squares for people who had already eaten. No one offered to help. They sat in the living room laughing at something my niece was showing them on her phone. I listened to the laughter while my fingers bled from the knife's slip. I wiped it with a paper towel and kept going. That was the day I realized I had become background. But I kept showing up, kept offering. Every Christmas, I'd buy each person a gift with handwritten tags. They gave me candles, scarves, once a fitness tracker. I kept believing it was a phase, that one day they'd turn to me and say, "We see you. We remember." I held on to that for years, until the invitations went out for my 65th. I sent them a month early hand-delivered cards, not just texts. I called to follow up. I made it sound easy. Dinner a few hours, nothing fancy. I heard the hesitation in Rachel's voice. James said, "We'll try." I didn't let myself think about what that meant. I focused on the menu on the playlist, on what earrings to wear. I told myself I wasn't hoping, but I set 15 places. 15. Because some part of me still believed that love once planted would return like perennials in spring. That they remembered who I was, what I gave. That family even fractured had roots. I didn't know then how long it had been since they last thought of me as someone who needed tending. It didn't happen all at once. That's the cruelty of it. If it had, maybe I would have screamed. Maybe I would have walked out one day, broken the porcelain mask I'd worn for decades, and finally demanded to be seen. But that's not how it works. The forgetting, the slow erasure, it comes in tiny increments barely visible, until one day you realize there's nothing left but a shadow where you used to stand. The first time I noticed it, really noticed, it was over dinner at Rachel's place 2 summers ago. Her youngest, Sophie, had just started school, and they invited me over for a little celebration. I brought a scrapbook I'd made with pictures from when Rachel was that age: missing teeth, crooked braids, one shoe always untied. I thought she'd laugh, maybe even cry. But when I pulled it from my bag, Rachel barely glanced at it. "Oh, wow. That's sweet," she said, her eyes already shifting back to the oven timer. "Can you put that somewhere? There's no space on the table." I told myself it was just the chaos of dinner. But then she didn't bring it up again. I left it behind, thinking maybe she'd look through it later. 2 weeks passed. No call, no mention. Finally, I asked if Sophie had seen it. Rachel hesitated. "Oh, I think it got moved to the garage with the rest of the boxes." The rest of the boxes? That's what I'd become. When I was younger, their eyes used to light up when I walked into a room. Now their eyes skim over me, like I'm furniture they appreciate but don't sit on anymore. I'd speak, and conversations would bend around me like water parting around a stone. They'd say, "Oh, Mom, that's not what people do anymore," or, "You wouldn't get it. It's a millennial thing." And I'd laugh, pretending I wasn't shrinking, pretending I didn't feel like a foreigner in my own lineage. Meals became shorter. Calls became logistical. I'd hear about family gatherings afterward through social media posts or an offhand comment weeks later. And when I'd ask softly, not accusing, they'd say, "We figured you were busy," or, "It was just last minute, you wouldn't have liked it." Always with the assumption that my life had become so small, I wouldn't want to be part of theirs. But Emily, she was different. She'd call sometimes, not to ask for anything, but just to talk. To tell me about a book she was reading, or ask for an old recipe. She'd show up with the kids, unexpectedly bringing muffins or flowers from their backyard. I saw the way James grew irritated with her for it sometimes. "Why are you always over there?" he'd mutter once when he thought I wasn't listening. She shrugged. "Because she listens." It wasn't until later I understood what that really meant. After Daniel died, I had all his belongings boxed within a week, not because I didn't care, but because there was no one to help me carry the weight of his memory. James asked if he could come by to pick up Dad's watch. Rachel wanted a few photos. Neither asked how I was sleeping, whether I was eating. Emily did. She brought soup. She sat on the edge of my bed like a daughter would touched my hand and asked, "Are you okay?" I cried in front of her that night, the way I never could with my own children. She never looked away. So when I sent out the birthday invitations, I added a note just for her. "If you're able to come, I'd really love to see you. Just you." It was the only line I wrote with hope. I didn't expect she'd show. Not when everyone else made excuses. But she did. And in that quiet presence, I began to feel the first tremors of something I didn't yet have words for. Not anger, not sadness, but something older, deeper. Grief, perhaps. Not for a person, but for an entire life spent folding myself into corners. And the cold realization that my family had grown accustomed to the convenience of my silence. I wasn't snooping. That's the part I keep turning over in my mind, like a stone I can't stop worrying with my fingers. It wasn't curiosity that led me to it. It was something else, accidental, circumstantial. But the damage it did, that part, was permanent. Sophie left her iPad at my house. It was after one of the rare Sunday visits Emily had arranged, just her and the kids. James had begged off again, something about a last-minute client meeting. I remember how warm the afternoon had been, the smell of orange peel and cinnamon still lingering in the kitchen after I'd baked that silly loaf she liked. The iPad was on the arm of the couch when I found it. The screen lit up as I touched it, no password, just a string of messages in a group chat I wasn't supposed to see. The title made my stomach go tight, core crew. I wasn't even sure what I was looking at first. There were names Rachel James, my sister Barbara, and 2 cousins. And then a message from Rachel Mom's 65th is coming up. Are we doing anything? I stared at the message, not because of what it said, but because of the silence that followed. 32 minutes passed between that message and the next one, where Barbara finally replied, I just can't sit through another guilt trip. She means well, but it's exhausting. My thumb moved without instruction, like muscle memory, like gravity. James replied next, I think we're all kind of done pretending it's still fun. She just wants attention. Maybe she's lonely, but we have our own lives. I read that one twice. Then Rachel. Let's just skip this year. I'm already buried at work and flying in is just not worth the drama. Not worth. That phrase echoed inside me like a bell in a hollow house. I remember the quiet in the room, how loud it became. The dishwasher had just finished, and its soft hum gave way to nothing. The walls seemed to lean closer. My pulse was in my ears. I could feel the blood rising in my chest, then draining all at once. I sat down on the edge of the couch, iPad still in my hands, and read the rest. There were jokes, little jabs I wasn't supposed to see. Maybe we should just send her a fruit basket and call it a day. She'll be fine. She has her cats. I don't have cats. I don't even like cats. They weren't just forgetting me. They were building a version of me, needy, pathetic, out of touch, and sharing it like a campfire joke. I didn't cry. Not then. I just placed the iPad face down on the coffee table, walked into the kitchen, and opened the fridge, as if there might be some answer hiding behind the mustard and cold chicken. There wasn't, just the same silence I'd known for years, now fully named. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my room with the lights off, staring out the window, watching headlights slice through the dark. I thought about every lunch packed, every fever soothed, every night I stood in a hallway holding my breath while they cried in their beds. And then I thought about how they now spoke about me like a problem. An outdated app they no longer wanted to update. The betrayal wasn't the group chat. It was the tone, the ease, the absence of love in the spaces where I'd poured mine so endlessly. That next morning, I got up and took the invitations I hadn't mailed yet, 3 more still sitting on the counter, and dropped them into the trash. It felt final, like burying something. Not hope. Hope had already died. It was the ritual of letting the death be real. Then I picked up the phone and confirmed the reservation at the restaurant anyway. Because some part of me, wounded, shaking, still wanted to hold space. Just in case. Just in case even one person showed up and said, I remember. And in the end, one did. Not blood, not by birth, but someone who saw me. And that night, her seeing cracked something wide open. Emily stayed long after the servers began folding chairs and extinguishing candles. The jazz pianist had packed up and left without saying goodbye, but she remained, her coat draped on the back of the chair, hands wrapped around a cup of tea one of the waitresses had brought out of pity. I was still sitting in my green dress, the zipper digging slightly into my spine, the weight of my hairpins beginning to press into my scalp. It was past midnight. The restaurant had closed to the public an hour ago. But we were still there. Two women left in a room filled with the ghosts of people I used to matter to. Emily took a sip of her tea and looked at me in a way that made it clear she wasn't going to pretend. "Can I ask something?" she said quietly. I nodded. My voice felt far away. "Did you know they weren't coming?" I hesitated. "Not for certain. But you knew. I hoped anyway." I looked at her. "Isn't that ridiculous?" She shook her head. "No, it's not ridiculous. It's human." For a while, we sat in silence. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind that made room for truth. I saw the messages I said after a long pause. On Sophie's iPad, the group chat, Emily's shoulders dropped like a confession had finally been spoken aloud. She didn't ask what messages. She didn't pretend she didn't know. "I figured you might," she said softly. "I saw it open on the table after we left and my stomach just—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. "I think what hurts the most," I said, staring down at my empty wine glass, "is how easy it was for them. How casual." Emily reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her fingers were warm, steady. "I know," she said. "I've heard them talk. I've tried to tell James he doesn't see you, that he's buying into this idea of you. But he just shrugs it off, says you're old school, that you make things heavier than they need to be." I looked at her then. "Do I know?" she said without hesitation. "You feel things deeply. That's not the same." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the words settle inside the hollow of my chest. "I spent my life carrying them," I whispered. "All of them. I built a life out of their needs. I bent myself into shapes to make sure they felt safe and seen and heard. And now, I feel like a museum they outgrew." Emily was crying then, not big sobs, just a quiet river, steady and respectful. Her thumb rubbed circles on the back of my hand, like she was trying to erase years of dismissal. "They're wrong," she said finally. "And they don't even realize how wrong." I wanted to scream, or fall to the floor, or ask why. But I didn't. Instead, I spoke what I hadn't said aloud to anyone. "I don't want their apologies," I said. "I don't want forced dinners or performative calls. I just want to stop waiting. I want to stop making room for people who never planned to arrive." Emily sat back slowly, wiping her cheeks with the sleeve of her coat. "Then maybe this is the beginning." "The beginning of what of your life?" she said. "The part that belongs to no one else." We left the restaurant a little after 1 in the morning. The city was quiet, streetlights casting long shadows. Emily hugged me again, this time tighter. She whispered happy birthday in my ear before walking away. As I watched her car pull out of the lot and disappear into the dark, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not joy, not resolution, but stillness. And inside that stillness, I found something close to power. The next morning, I woke up in silence, but it didn't sting like it usually did. The usual rituals followed: slippers on the floor, tea kettle on the stove, the creak of the hallway wood beneath my steps. I stood by the window with my cup watching the sunlight thread through the trees and realized something strange. I didn't feel hollow. I felt here, not needed, not remembered, but present. I didn't call anyone that day. I didn't send thank you texts or apology emails for taking up space. I didn't try to explain the empty restaurant or make excuses for their absence. I just let the day be what it was. Quiet, still, honest. Later that afternoon, I walked into the dining room and stared at the long wooden table that had once hosted Thanksgiving dinners, birthday parties, and years of casserole nights. I ran my fingers along the edge of it. The scratches from toy cars, the heat marks from dishes served too soon. A history of effort carved into oak. And then I listed it for sale. I replaced it with a round bistro table and 2 chairs, a space made for conversation, not performance. I bought soft yellow cushions for them. Something about that small act felt sacred, like reclaiming a room in my own home that had long belonged to everyone but me. I took the lavender place cards from the party and used them as bookmarks. Each one, once meant to show care, now slipped between pages of novels I had finally allowed myself to read. I began painting again, slowly at first, like learning to walk on a sprained ankle. My first brush strokes were hesitant, unsure, but then colors emerged. Deep ochres, dusty blues. I let emotion guide my hand instead of memory. I stopped painting what I thought people wanted and started painting what I couldn't say out loud. The house, once filled with the ghosts of duties and obligations, began to breathe differently. I rearranged furniture, took down photos that felt more like proofs of loyalty than love. I kept one, though, an old picture of me holding Olivia in the hospital. Her 6 days mattered. She didn't get a chance to forget me. Rachel called 2 weeks after the birthday. I let it go to voicemail. The message was polite, stiff. Heard the dinner didn't go as planned. Hope everything's okay. We'll do something soon. She didn't say sorry, just tossed me a breadcrumb of obligation. I didn't return the call. James texted. Emily said the dinner was nice. Hope you're well. I stared at the screen for a long time before deleting the message. No reply. No anger. Just deletion. And it felt clean. Emily came by the following Sunday with the kids. They played in the yard while we sat on the porch, sipping lemonade, her feet tucked up beneath her. They're confused, she said after a while, about the silence, about the change. They'll survive confusion, I replied. They've survived my silence all these years. I figure they'll manage. Emily laughed, but there was a sadness in it. You really mean it, don't you? I do. I didn't say it out of bitterness. I said it because for the first time in my life, I believed I deserved to exist on my own terms, without proving my usefulness. She reached into her bag and handed me something, a sketchbook. Thick pages, linen-bound, untouched. I saw it at the bookstore and thought of you, she said. I turned it in my hands, touched the cover. It was beautiful, weighty, real. Thank you, I said. It's time you made something just for you, she whispered. And that night, I did. I sat in the soft light of my bedroom, opened the first page, and drew a chair in the middle of an empty room. Just one chair, one window, nothing else. I titled it, Welcome. Autumn came slowly that year, like it was asking permission. The trees held onto their leaves longer than usual, and even the wind felt reluctant to press too hard. I spent more time outside, walking the perimeter of the park near my home, watching as the world prepared to let go of what it no longer needed. Nature didn't scream in loss. It shed with quiet grace. I thought of that often. Emily kept visiting. Not every week, but enough that her absence would have felt like something missing if too much time passed. She brought the kids, or came alone with a thermos of chamomile tea and updates about work James, the quiet ache of motherhood. Our conversations shifted from soft sympathy to honesty, the kind that strips away performance. She told me once, while we were raking leaves in the backyard, that she envied my solitude. "It's not something most people earn," she said. "They just end up alone. You've claimed it. There's a difference." I smiled, but didn't speak. It was too fragile a thing to name aloud. The early days after the party had felt like grief. Yes, but also like detox. My body ached from decades of accommodation. My mind replayed conversations where I'd bitten my tongue, folded my will, rearranged my schedule for the benefit of others who no longer even noticed. Now, without those patterns, my life had a kind of strange spaciousness. I started cooking for one, really cooking. Not just microwaved leftovers or sensible dinners, but things I actually enjoyed. Goat cheese and figs on toasted bread, fresh basil torn from the windowsill. I poured wine without occasion. I lit candles just for myself. I even moved my old record player into the living room and played my favorite albums on Sunday mornings, barefoot, twirling in my robe, like I had when I was 30 and the house was still mine. James and Rachel each called again in October. I didn't answer. It wasn't punishment. I just didn't want to. It felt good in a quiet way to break the contract I'd signed so long ago, the unspoken agreement that my time, my energy, my love would be given without reciprocity. That I would chase them for crumbs when I had once offered a feast. There's power in withholding, not out of cruelty, but from clarity. They had made their choices, and now I was making mine. I heard through Emily that they were confused. Rachel said I was acting different. James thought maybe I was mad about the birthday. Emily told them gently that it went deeper than that, but I don't think they understood. Maybe they never will. And I've stopped hoping that they will. Instead, I began to fill my sketchbook. One image at a time. Always quiet spaces, rooms, with open windows, chairs pulled out from tables, light streaming in over empty cups. I realized somewhere around the third page that I wasn't drawing loneliness. I was drawing peace, the kind that only comes after the floodwaters have receded, and you're left with your hands, your breath, and the blessed quiet of not needing anyone's permission to begin again. One night in late October, Emily came over without the kids. James was out of town, and she looked tired, her eyes rimmed with something she wasn't yet ready to speak. "I think I married a man who doesn't see women," she said quietly. "Not really, just uses them. For calm, for order, for ego." I didn't answer. I didn't offer comfort or counsel. I just handed her a blanket and poured her tea. We sat in silence for nearly an hour before she whispered, "Thank you," for what she didn't say. But I understood. She was starting to see, too. Not just them, but herself. It was a Tuesday when Rachel showed up unannounced. Late afternoon gray light pressing against the windows like fogged glass. I was folding laundry in the den, a jazz record spinning low in the background, when I heard the knock. Not the light tap of a neighbor or the careful courtesy of a delivery. This was hard, sharp, urgent. I opened the door, and there she was. Hair pulled into a tight ponytail, dressed in business casual pressed blazer, phone in hand, face tight with intention. She looked at me like someone approaching a witness, not a mother. "I've been calling," she said. "You haven't responded." I stepped aside and let her in. She walked in like she still belonged to the space, barely noticing the changes, the table gone, the walls repainted the art I'd begun hanging piece by piece. I watched her eyes move over the living room like it was unfamiliar terrain. "I'm busy," I said simply. She turned. "Since when?" That stopped me. I let out a short breath, not quite a laugh. "Since I decided I mattered." Rachel blinked. It was small, but I saw it, a falter in her stance. A miscalculation. She'd come here to confront someone soft, someone malleable, someone who would cave at the first sign of tension. She was unprepared for the woman who now stood in front of her, spine straight, arms relaxed. "I'm sorry we didn't come," she said, eventually the words tumbling out too quickly to be sincere. "Work's been insane. Sophie had a fever that weekend. And you were in a group chat." I interrupted, my voice steady. "You all decided I wasn't worth the inconvenience." Her mouth closed. I read the messages. The color drained slightly from her face. She looked down at her shoes. It was out of context. It was honest," I said. Silence filled the room. My record ended with a click. I didn't rush to start it again. "I don't want to fight," she said, almost whispering. "We're not fighting," I replied. "We're just finally being honest with each other." She walked over to the window and looked out toward the yard. "I guess I didn't think it mattered. I mean, birthdays come every year. I thought you'd understand." I stepped toward her, slow, intentional. "I understand that you stopped seeing me a long time ago. You all did. I became a chore, a box to check off during the holidays. You stopped asking questions. You stopped remembering who I was before I was just mom." Her lips trembled, but no tears came. Rachel never cried easily, not even as a little girl. She just got quiet and closed off like someone boarding up windows before a storm. "I don't know what you want from me," she said. "Nothing," I answered. "That's the point." She turned back to me. Her eyes, sharp like flint, looked me over with something bordering on confusion. Or maybe fear. "I spent decades giving. I gave you everything I had, and I never asked for much in return. But now, Rachel, I'm asking for distance. Not out of anger, but out of respect for myself." Her arms crossed tight against her chest. A shield. "So this is it, you're cutting us off." "No," I said. "I'm just not holding the door open anymore." She stayed another 10 minutes. We talked in circles, she trying to defend, without admitting fault, me standing calmly in the home I'd finally reclaimed. When she left, she hugged me stiffly. It felt like an old habit, not an offering. The door clicked shut behind her. I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of the exchange settle in the air like dust. And then I turned on the music again. That night, I lit candles and painted a field of tall grass. No people, just wind and gold and open sky. The day the dining table sold, the man who came to pick it up asked if I was sure. "It's solid oak," he said, tapping it like he was knocking on a door. "These don't come around much anymore." I just nodded. "I know." He loaded it into the back of his truck with the help of his teenage son. I watched from the porch, my arms crossed against the light November chill, as years of holidays, quiet dinners, and quiet disappointments drove away down the street. I didn't cry, not even when the indentation it left in the carpet made the room look suddenly impossibly big. Emily came by that afternoon. She didn't ask about the table. She noticed, of course. Her eyes flickered to the open space and back to mine, but she didn't ask. Instead, she handed me a box wrapped in brown paper and tied with a ribbon that looked like twine pulled from a garden. Inside was a set of watercolor pencils, the expensive kind, the ones that melt with a single touch of water into soft bloom. "No more excuses," she said, and smiled. We sat at the new bistro table, round small, more room for breath than expectation, and drank coffee while the light moved across the walls. Her kids were with James that day. She said it like a passing comment, but something in the way she looked at the wall when she said his name told me things she hadn't yet spoken. "He doesn't like that I come here," she said after a pause. I didn't answer right away. "He says I'm encouraging something toxic, that I'm feeding your narrative." "Do you believe that?" She looked at me, eyes steady. "No, I believe I'm witnessing your becoming." It was a strange phrase, but it stayed with me, my becoming, as if all this time I had been dormant, seated, rooted, waiting. The next morning, I opened a fresh page in my sketchbook and wrote that phrase at the bottom in small, careful script, witnessing my becoming. Then I drew a series of open doors. Each one led to a different room. No figures, no people. Just thresholds. Just choices. That week, I booked a ticket to Santa Fe. I'd never been. It was a trip I once tried to plan with Daniel for our 25th anniversary, but he said it was too far, too expensive, too much. I canceled it, like I canceled other things, ceramics classes, writing retreats, even just weekends alone in a hotel with a view and room service. Too much, too selfish, too indulgent. Now I wanted to indulge. I told no one but Emily. She helped me find a casita through a friend of hers. I booked 10 days. She smiled when I told her. "They won't know where you are," she said. "Good," I replied. I packed light. A small suitcase, my sketchbook, the pencils, a scarf that smelled like lavender. I left the thermostat on low, watered the plants, and said an out-of-office reply on the family group chat that I had finally stopped responding to. In the airport, I sat near the window and watched the planes rise into the sky like second chances. I didn't feel nervous. I felt free. The air in Santa Fe was different, drier, thinner, threaded with the scent of desert sage and something ancient I couldn't name. The first morning, I stepped barefoot onto the stone patio of the little adobe casita I'd rented, coffee in one hand, sketchbook in the other, and felt the earth beneath me in a way I hadn't in years. Not filtered through suburbia, not dimmed by obligations, just dirt and stone and silence. The sun rose slow and generous, casting long golden light over the clay-colored walls and distant hills. I sat at the small iron table with my feet curled beneath me, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't check my phone. I didn't scroll. I didn't perform my existence for anyone. I just was. The days followed like water, easy and unforced. I walked through galleries with ceilings that smelled of wood and dust. I studied paintings without checking the time. I took photos of old door frames and dried corn hanging like wind chimes on stucco porches. I said hello to strangers and slept when I wanted. I drew every evening not for perfection, but for breath. Color became language. I stopped translating myself into words that could be accepted by others. I let the silence do the talking. By the 5th day, I realized I hadn't thought about James or Rachel in more than a passing glance. And when I did think of them, it was without ache, without longing, just awareness, like weather in a distant town. One night, a small museum downtown hosted an open sketching hour. I took my pencils and sat on a bench before a sculpture of a woman bent slightly forward, her hands cupped as if holding water. I sketched until my wrist ached. An older woman sat beside me at some point and said nothing until I finished. "She looks like she's finally caught what she's been reaching for," the woman said, gesturing to my drawing. I looked down at it and realized I'd drawn myself. Not literally, but the posture, the angle, the sense of quiet gravity, it was mine. A version of me who no longer needed to plead. I nodded. "Yes," I said, "she has." That night back at the casita, I lit a fire in the small kiva and wrapped myself in a blanket. I poured a glass of red wine and read poetry aloud to no one. I whispered each line into the quiet, like an incantation, like a declaration. The flames flickered across the clay walls, and I felt something inside me shift, like the last stone being set down from a lifetime of carrying. Emily texted me the next morning. "Just checking in. I hope it's everything you needed and more." I replied with a photo of the mountain at sunrise and 3 words: "It's becoming mine." She didn't write back. She didn't have to. That day, I bought myself a ring from a small silversmith shop. A narrow band with a single turquoise stone bright as a secret. I placed it on my right hand, not as a token of love received, but love reclaimed. I wore it every day after that. Not because I needed to be reminded, but because I wanted to mark the moment I stopped waiting to be chosen. I came home from Santa Fe 10 days later. No fanfare, no expectations. The house was still. Dust motes in the window light. The mail piled up in a neat stack, mostly flyers and bills. I sorted through it slowly. One envelope from Rachel, handwritten. I opened it. Inside a card. Store-bought. "Hope you're doing well. Let's talk soon. Love R." No apology, just enough to suggest effort. I slid it into the back of my sketchbook and turned the page. That night, I sat at my table, pencil in hand, and began a new drawing. A single chair in a wide desert, and above it, a sky with no ceiling. Winter pressed in slowly like a quiet hand on my shoulder. The cold came not as a storm, but a hush, a kind of stilling. I found myself drawn to soft things, wool socks, early nights, warm soups that simmered all day. I wrapped the house in low light and quiet music. I stopped measuring time by birthdays or holidays. I stopped planning my days around anyone else's calendar. There was freedom in being forgotten. Emily still visited. Not as often things were shifting with James. She didn't say much, but she didn't have to. I saw it in her posture, in the way her hands gripped the mug tighter when she sat across from me, in the way her voice occasionally drifted off before the sentence was finished. Sometimes I wondered if she envied me this solitude I had forged from heartbreak. She didn't say it, but I could feel it. Her visits weren't about loyalty anymore. They were about oxygen. One Sunday, she came alone. No coat, even in the snow. Just a long scarf and that faraway look. "I think I'm leaving him," she said, settling onto the couch. I didn't say anything. I simply placed a blanket over her knees and poured the tea. "He doesn't even notice I'm gone half the time. When I come here, I feel like a person again." Her voice cracked then just slightly. She was unraveling and she knew it, but she wasn't ashamed of it. And I didn't rush in to fix anything. I'd done enough fixing for one lifetime. Instead, I sat beside her and let the silence answer. After she left, I stood at the window a long while, watching her taillights disappear into the gray light of the street. I thought of all the women I had been. The girl who believed love was earned through endurance, the wife who cooked and cleaned and stayed quiet, the mother who gave until she was nothing but a phone number and a list of reminders. And now this woman standing in her own house with no one to report to, no one to entertain. Just breath, just choice. A week later, Rachel showed up again. This time, she brought Sophie. The little girl ran inside, wrapped her arms around my legs, and asked if I had any special cookies. I did. I always had cookies when they came, though I'd never say that aloud. It wasn't for Rachel. It was for the part of family I still believed in. Children, after all, don't know how to abandon you. Not yet. Rachel wandered through the house, pausing at one of my paintings hung above the mantel. "Did you do this?" I nodded. "Last week." She stepped closer. "It's different." "I am." She turned to look at me, searching for the old shape of me she used to count on. I could feel her trying to find it, the easy mother, the one who never asked for more than a text, who absorbed disappointment like it was her duty. But that woman was gone. Sophie sat beside me on the floor, eating a cookie, chattering about school, and a class pet named Benny. I smiled, brushed crumbs from her cheek, and listened with everything I had. Rachel watched us for a long time. Then, almost reluctantly, she sat on the arm of the chair. "I think I messed up," she said softly. I looked up. "I know." Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away before they could fall. "I didn't know how to be your daughter when you stopped being what I needed you to be." I didn't flinch. I didn't nod. I just let her speak. "I thought you'd always just be there. And when you pulled back, it felt like punishment." "It wasn't," I said. "It was survival." We sat in the quiet. Sophie kept talking, oblivious, a world still unshaped by resentment. Rachel reached over and touched my hand. "I don't expect things to go back, but maybe we could start again. Differently." I didn't answer. Not because I didn't believe her, but because I finally understood something I never had before. Forgiveness doesn't mean return. Sometimes it's just a gate that opens inward. When they left, I stood by the door, one hand on the frame. Rachel turned back once, a question in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. I nodded. Then I closed the door, not as a goodbye, but as a boundary. And I returned to my table, my pencils, my pages, where I needed no permission to keep becoming. Spring came quietly, as if unsure of its welcome. Buds pushed cautiously through soil still wet with memory. And I found myself walking again, long, slow walks through the neighborhood I had lived in for over 30 years, but was only now truly seeing. The bark on the elm trees, once just background to a life rushing past, now looked like stories carved in a forgotten language. I stopped often just to look at things. That was the difference now. I wasn't rushing anymore. Not to meet anyone's expectations, not to prove anything. I no longer checked my phone first thing in the morning. I no longer waited for Rachel or James to remember me. I no longer held my breath in the moments when the doorbell rang or the phone buzzed. There were still days when the ache surfaced, unexpected, uninvited. I'd see a child holding their mother's hand too tightly in the grocery store, or hear someone say, "Mom," too softly on a call beside me in the post office, and something inside me would tug. Not regret, not longing, just the outline of what once was. But more often than not, there was peace. Emily left James in March. She didn't make a spectacle of it. She moved into a small apartment 2 towns over and started teaching art classes at the local community center. She called me one evening to say thank you. "You didn't tell me to leave," she said, "but watching you choose yourself gave me the courage to choose me." That night, I painted the apartment she'd described over the phone. Sunlight over wood floors, a mug on a windowsill. A canvas leaned against the wall like a promise. I titled it, "Begin Here." Rachel came by more often after that. Not to apologize, just to be near. Sometimes she'd sit in the kitchen and talk about things that had nothing to do with the past. Her job, her garden, the hummingbird feeder she was learning to refill without scaring them away. There was a gentleness between us now, a mutual understanding that some things don't get fixed. They just get named, and once they're named, they don't own you anymore. James sent a card for Mother's Day. No return address. Inside was a single sentence. "I'm sorry I didn't understand you." I didn't write back. It wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. That apology was for him, not for me. And I no longer lived inside the idea that I owed anyone my healing. On my 66th birthday, I made no plans. I walked the park trail that curves around the small lake, and I brought my sketchbook. I drew a bench beneath a willow tree, and in the distance, a figure walking away, not out of sadness, but completion. That evening, Emily came over with a bouquet of wildflowers and 2 slices of chocolate cake from the bakery downtown. We sat on the porch, no decorations, no expectations. "You feel different," she said after a while. "I am," she smiled. "You look lighter." "I'm not lighter," I said. "I'm just not carrying what's not mine anymore." And it was true. Some days were still tender, but none were wasted. I'd spent so long trying to be unforgettable, only to realize that being remembered wasn't the prize. Living fully, unapologetically, peacefully, completely, that was the reward. No one else had to witness it. I was finally enough witness for myself. The house is quieter now, but not empty. It breathes with me. Light moves slowly across the walls, and every corner holds pieces I chose, no longer relics of someone else's need. My sketchbook is nearly full. Not every drawing is beautiful, but each one is honest. I sit by the window most mornings, coffee in hand. No rush, no lists. No one waiting on me, and no one I'm waiting on. Some treasures had been recovered. Others, more valuable, still had been discovered for the first time. It wasn't the ending I'd expected. It was better, harder, clearer, more honest. It was mine. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.